Okay, Michael, we are live and you are good to start.
Good morning and welcome to our event, Economic Recovery and Rebuilding in Latin America and the Caribbean, Rebuilding the Social Fabric in Latin America and the Caribbean. Today's session is organized jointly with United Way and the Inter-American Dialogues Corporate Program. I want to give a special thanks to Eduardo Quiroz and Sofia Diaz from United Way for their support in this partnership and collaboration. I'd also like to thank the members of the Dialogues Corporate Program attending today for their continued support of our events and our publications. And I want to recognize and thank the director of our corporate program, Eric Brand, for conceiving and coordinating this event and assistance from Kate Blanchett. I am especially pleased that joining us today is the International President of United Way Worldwide, Jose Ferrão. Jose will make introductory remarks to frame the issue, and which will be followed by brief opening remarks by our speakers, who I will introduce after Jose's opening remarks, and then we'll have question and answer with participants. So, Jose, it's a pleasure now to turn it over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael. It is great to be with you here today, and thank you for joining us this morning, this afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in. It is really an important conversation that we're all about to have. But I first want to thank the Inter-American Dialogue for their incredible work and their partnership, without which this dialogue would not be possible. Now more than ever, it's important that we share ideas in the pursuit of exploring new possibilities and finding sustainable solutions. And I'm grateful that United Way can be a partner in bringing this conversation to life. This past year, COVID-19 has presented extraordinary challenges to communities around the world. And for the Latin America and the Caribbean region, the consequences of the pandemic have been both devastating as well as disproportionate in terms of the share of infections and deaths worldwide. And the social and economic impacts have only further exacerbated the pre-existing economic and social inequalities, as well as the aftermath of recent natural disasters. The communities need our support. It's only possible for us to do this work when we come together. Sustainable solutions cannot be developed by one organization or one individual or one company or one government. It is all about us coming together and stand together to ensure that we create thriving communities for the future. We must not only respond, because what we've all been busy with over the past 6 to 8 months has really been responding to an immediate need that exists community by community. And I think we're now reaching a stage where we need to start thinking about the future, and we need to start reimagining how our communities need to be rebuilt. Because our communities need our support. United Ways have stepped in during this time, together with our corporate partners from around the world, in responding to the community's most pressing needs. We met our communities in crisis, in whatever need existed, community by community. It was about what the immediate need was in that specific community. With presence in over 16 countries across the region, we've been able to listen and anticipate some community challenges and opportunities by bringing people together. And that's what we as United Way believe is one of the key factors for success, is how do we bring everybody to the table that has a contribution to make. We know our communities, we understand their needs, but we also help to build that table where everybody can come together to create solutions that are sustainable. And And our United Ways in Latin America and the Caribbean are working tirelessly to set the table for rebuilding their communities. So country by country, you can rely on United Way to be there to support the community and to help bring the community together wherever appropriate. It is time for us to think about scalable solutions that are sustainable. Our communities in Latin America need us today, and we each have a role to play to contribute in creating a more equitable and sustainable set of communities around the region. As I said, we need to reimagine the collaboration between the private sector, public, nonprofit sectors, so we effectively can create real change that equips communities to weather some of these challenges that they face year upon year. Today's conversation is critical in examining how the private sector can help rebuild the social fabric of the Latin America and the Caribbean region and help rebuild a more inclusive and equitable economy going forward. Thank you all for listening, and it is important that we continue to think through how best to collaborate and create stronger societies that are more resilient than we have today. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate your opportunity to open this discussion.
Thank you so much, Jose, and thank you for getting us off to such a terrific start and for, I think, framing the issues that we really want to delve into in today's discussion. Without further ado, let me just introduce, we're very fortunate to have three superb speakers who have agreed to share their perspectives, different perspectives on this issue of what the private sector can do in these circumstances, partnerships with the public sector, and discuss some initiatives and and programs that are going forward that offer some new opportunities in the years ahead in terms of employment. So let me please, I'd like to introduce the speakers in the order in which they'll speak. Karim Lacina is the Executive Vice President and the Chief External Affairs Officer at Millicom. Thank you so much, Karim, for joining us. Cecilia Vaca-Jones is the Executive Director at the Bernard Van Leer Foundation and a former Minister of Social Development in Ecuador. Cecilia joins us from The Hague today. And thank you, Cecilia. And Jose Varela, who is the Vice President for Latin American Corporate Affairs and Governance at 3M and Managing Director, 3M Mexico, has been with 3M for a number of years. And we're very, very grateful to Jose as well for joining us. So let me start now and turn the floor to Karim, who will share his thoughts, and then we'll hear from Cecilia, Jose, and then we'll open it up to all of you. If you want to participate in this conversation and pose the question, please use the Q&A function and just raise your hand, and I'll be happy to call on you. Thank you very much, and we'll turn it to Karim. Karim?
Thanks a lot, Michael, and thanks to Jose also to supporting this event. I think it's a timely event as usual with you guys at the Inter-American Dialogue. You know, it's also a timely event with me because, as probably some people know me, I've been just joining Millicom 6 weeks ago. I'm still coming from telecom because, as probably people remember, I was in AT&T before, so it doesn't change a lot of what you're going to hear on the part of the organization. But I think it's an incredible moment when we think what we have all lived this year. You know, we also are getting into these holidays with more hope. I think we have seen that the first vaccines have started to be administered in some countries, like here in the US or in the UK. But obviously, I hope everybody will stay safe during those holidays because, let's say, we have been patient for 9 months. Let's try to be patient a few more months, right, Michael? But I really hope that the next event we will do, Michael, it will be again in your beautiful office where we have live and we can really enjoy also one-to-one meetings and etc. and not only speaking to a camera wherever we are in the world, but at least we can have this nice discussion with Cecilia and with Jose being in different countries. So look, when I'm looking at the theme of economical recovery, I want to use what you said, Michael, and also what Jose said is in his introduction. I think what we can learn from these 9 months is the incredible level of collaboration that came between private, public, civil society. This crisis probably taught us a lot on how we can define new priorities. How we can work together in order to answer to a problem that was huge, but it's in every country. Minicom operates in Central and Latin America and Africa, but smaller operator in a sense, but 52 million customers, 23,000 employees. It gives you a good sense. But wherever I think our operation as a telecom operator for us or for others, the most important challenge we had was really to coordinate with local authorities in order to work together, because economical problems, lockdowns that obviously sometimes are difficult when you manage networks and you need to send people on towers in order to solve problems. People are used to have technicians coming to their house to solve problems. So a lot of these things are needed to happen, but also on the other side, connecting the unconnected, connecting people that were not able to go to the office, and I think what the telecom sector showed, or the internet ecosystem showed, is the incredible resilience of the technology. We are here all together looking at things like this being totally normal, right? We are able to do Zoom all over the world, video calls and etc. And we have to remember in the last 15 years how this technology took us there. Investments, a lot of investments from the operator, a lot of innovation coming from the ecosystem. Zoom is a clear example. We are using Zoom today. We could use WebEx, we could use Teams, but it's incredible, the technology there. So when I look at next year, really the economical recovery, what do we really have to do? I think some of the countries, or most of the countries, are going to go into the recovery in a very stretched situations. All the economics are difficult. This was a difficult year, not only for corporation, but specifically for government. So we'll have to work together in order to define those priorities, in order to work together to relaunch those economies all around the world, and being sure that we don't get into temptations of identifying new taxes, new recovery taxes, but working really on how to unleash the potential. How to relaunch everything. And I think that's super important because we have seen in the region, I think the ECLAC recently published the latest numbers where FDIs in the region, but in general, have been really decreasing. And what we need to do is really relaunch that, work with all the international banks, but also with the national governments to define policies that are going to be able to relaunch the economy and to be sure that people have the capacity to get back really in a new normal. I don't think we will be able to be back where we were a year ago because this crisis should teach us that this is a new normal where we live. We use more digital in a certain sense, but at the same time, we try to promote those investments. We try to attract that capital. And we know that capital flows where they see the best return. So we need to be sure that we work all together, government, public, and civil society, to help in defining that new normal. I think that for me is the most important one, because if we want to take the society back and we want to help those communities that have been more affected, we will have to really push a lot in the next months to relaunch the economy really fast. So we don't get into a vicious circle that creates breaks and blocks. So that for me, the most important one. And as I say, Michael, and you specifically focus on that one, is working in a kind of collaboration of governments and private enterprises in order to define that, maybe using the local associations or maybe using the wider organization is going to be essential. So that's will be my first focus.
Great. Thank you very much, Kareem. That was terrific, and I'm sure we'll pick up on a lot of those issues in our question and answer session. Excuse me. Let me turn it over now to Cecilia. Cecilia?
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. And for those of you who don't know, the Bernard Van Leer Foundation is where I'm currently working. Our foundation works for the very young human beings. So basically, the Bernard Van Leer Foundation has been working during the last 50 years, just trying to ensure that the lives of all babies and toddlers can basically be the best possible in any society, in any given context, in any given country. And of course, we've done a lot of work in Latin America and the Caribbean. And for me, being part of this panel is just amazing because it's bringing the lens from the philanthropic sector. So the first thing I would like to say is I definitely agree that this pandemic has given a huge opportunity to cross-sectorial work and also to work across different levels of government, which is great. And I think we need to take an opportunity in order to strengthen this and just like make it as a way of working in the future. But I also want to mention that from the work that we do in the philanthropic sector, probably young children and particularly babies, when you think about babies, have been the most invisible human beings in this pandemic, probably because they are not directly affected by the virus, probably because they cannot speak. But one of the immediate effects that we're seeing, which is quite interesting, is that there's a big challenge of keeping some of the programs and the social policies in the region in order to ensure a good future for all of these children. So maybe today what I wanted to raise is just a couple of ideas and things that we have been doing in order to map which are some things that we could do from the philanthropic sector, but together with the corporate sector, with the governments, in order to really make sure that we're not having any regressive measures on the impact of the pandemic in babies, toddlers, and their families. And maybe just to share a couple of ideas, we've seen some good practices in many of our countries, and I wanted to make sure that I have some space to talk about this. So we've seen that in most countries in the region and in the world in general, one of the immediate measures for economic recovery has been cash transfers. And I think right now we have a lot of evidence that definitely having or providing direct financial support can keep and support families for a while. But in the long term, what we want to make sure is that if we are keeping this kind of cash transfer programs, we can link it to other social benefits. And we want to just make sure that we can share some good practices. There are some countries that, for example, have been able to combine cash transfer programs with, for example, parenting support, which has been very positive in this pandemic because a lot of families are just like struggling with parenting in general, just because they don't have access to services. In most of the Latin American countries, we haven't been able to enable educational services or childcare services, and this has a huge impact in the way that societies can become more productive. So we want to make sure that if we have this kind of policy, we are also supporting this policy with other services that can really have a more integrated and holistic approach on supporting families. Then maybe the other thing that we have seen work quite well in most countries is the fact that we can provide dedicated support through the corporate sector, through the productive sector, and just ensuring that when you're thinking about social policy, you're also thinking about which are the best ways that you can support your employees from the private sector on giving services like childcare services. And this might seem not that relevant, but we've seen that right now that most people are working remotely. One of the most challenging things has been actually to be able to cope with taking the caring responsibilities while doing and being effective on delivering all the professional activities. So I think that just ensuring that any kind of company, small and medium enterprises, can get some kind of certainty on the kind of support and financial support they can get in order to cover childcare services becomes like a huge priority in the more holistic approach of really being able to provide integrated support to families. Then maybe another thing that I've been quite impressed on the way that many countries have been able to support is ensuring that all industries are actively supporting families. And this also has to do with I think a quite evident issue that is coming in the pandemic, which is related to mental health. And I do want to put it on the table because I think it is quite evident that this pandemic is going to have like many different impacts, but I think that we need to make sure that if we're trying to promote the economic recovery and if we're going to try to really kind of promote like a productive recovery, we need to think that a lot of people are going through very hard times and they might need additional support on the mental health perspective. And the one reason we're mentioning this is because we see that the health services in all of our countries are under so much stress that if we're not able to cope with this very specific topic, aligning the efforts that we can do from the philanthropic sector, from the corporate sector, and from the public sector, we're probably not going to be able to really promote like a good recovery. So we need to make sure that employees who at the same time become caregivers in all families have the minimum basis to really deliver the way we want. And finally, I want to make sure that I touch on one thing. We were recently hosting a convening around the importance of having good data that allows us to make good decisions. And I wanted to share some thoughts because one of the other things that is quite evident when thinking about early childhood development and thinking about like metrics and indicators that can show what's happening at the moment is that we don't really have a lot of reliable data, as Karen was saying, at a local level on what's happening with families, what's happening with babies. So we probably have a lot of data that is related to health issues. We don't necessarily have data that can basically be compared across different sectors, or we don't necessarily do the exercise of basically using some very concrete metrics in order to understand and cross-cut information from different sectors. So I think it's a good timing to make the invisible more visible. And among this, I think young children, I think women, I think vulnerable families need to be more visible in order to tackle some of the problems that we have in the region. And in order to do this, we need a purpose that brings together the different voices. So if we want to support like a fast recovery in the region, I think it's a good moment to bring together the corporate sector, the private sector, the public sector, to really kind of focus on very concrete metrics that can look at a very local level, which are the biggest gaps that we need to deal with in order to make good decisions. And I think this would be the only way that we can really just like share the responsibility of closing the gaps. So for me, the biggest challenge that I think we're going to need to agree on is on really understanding which are the main metrics and indicators that we want to use at a very local level in order to start closing the gaps together. And I think that the challenge with this is that we might need to have many uncomfortable conversations among the different sectors in order to really tackle with these problems. So Michael, let me stop there because I'm really interested in just leaving more space for questions, but thank you for this space.
That was great. Thank you so much, Cecilia. And finally, let me turn to Jose for his thoughts. Jose?
Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. You know, and that has been very interesting, and I will focus my comments in social inclusion and equity in Latin America post the pandemic recovery. But before talking about that, we need to remember, and my peers have also said the same, that the pandemic, the COVID-19 is not over, right? We still have, even though we have very positive news, we still have some weeks or months to go. So number one, during the pandemic, and especially companies that are big employers and contribute a lot to the families in Latin America. For example, we provide more than 20,000 jobs, direct jobs in our region. we need to have as our first priority to protect our people, right? If we can work remotely, as many of us are doing, hey, stay at home and don't go to the office. If we need to go to the factories, and many employees needs to go to the factories, for example, we produce the N95 respirators and we need those factories running, we need to make sure that they have all the protections, sanitary protections while they are at work. But very important, that's not enough. We need to educate our communities and our employees that also transportation is important. We provide transportation door to door. And very important, when they are at home, when they are with their communities, when they go try to visit a family, they need to be 100% protected, even using a face mask within their homes. That has been key. And we found in many benchmarks that we did with other companies that employees were not getting the COVID at the factories. They were getting the COVID at their communities. So giving protection end to end, including in their house, educate their people is very important. Why I am mentioning this? Because we need to balance protection to the people, but also to keep the economy going. That will be key for the recovery. For sure, and changing gears a little bit, companies needs to help the communities with social programs, cash donations, in-kind donations. And I think partnership with organization, NGOs as United Way is key, right? Because they present very holistic approach to these activities, including volunteer hours. But I will say, in addition to that, we need to provide many things, but I want to focus in two. Keep providing jobs to Latin America and keep providing know-how to the communities. And I will explain that. And when we go and provide jobs to our communities, probably we need to make a change in the past that we used to provide jobs as we did in the past. And let me be more precise. Diversity and inclusion and taking in consideration all the members of the society will be super important for the recovery. And there has been a lot of talks about diversity and inclusion is gender, is sex orientation, is disabilities, or even race. Especially many companies right now, after the sad events of George Floyd in the United States, in Minneapolis, they are focusing a lot in race. I think that's very important, but not enough for Latin America. We need to concentrate and also take in consideration that diversity includes the social class and includes the education background. We need to provide good opportunities that can grow in the company to all the social classes and all the educational backgrounds. And I think in the past, we're doing a mistake in many companies, including ours. We were saying, hey, you to be a manager or you to have a really successful career, you need to come from the very best university in the country, or you need to speak and you need to speak perfect English, right? That costs money. And immediately excluded many people from our communities. So right now we're making a very target change. I'm saying, it doesn't matter if you come from a public school or public university, probably not the top one, or your English is not good. We're going to collaborate with the society, with you, and we're going to give opportunities so you can grow. I think doing that's really inclusion. We're going to include a big percentage of the population, and that's very good. But also, I talk about sharing our know-how with the communities. Our company, 3M, we're a science company, and science is very important for the development of our region and the world, especially to promote STEM. We do a survey every year in many countries, including Latin America, Brazil, and Mexico. And the data is telling us, we measure because we want to promote science, that 50% of the young people in our countries, they don't believe that they have access to scientific knowledge. Basically, they feel excluded. 34% of the young people in our countries, they believe that science is just for nerds, and or that they are not smart enough to study a STEM career. And a big percentage also, they feel that they are not capable to study science because they were born poor. So, if we want to recover the economies permanently, we need to promote science. And that's where companies like us and many companies can help, not just to give, a donation or volunteer hours, is to teach science. We have many labs in Latin America, and we invite young kids or young adults to our labs. Now we're doing virtually for sure, but before the pandemic, we invite them to our labs. And what's amazing, we always make a question to these kids before they enter the lab. And we said, hey, what do you want to do when you are a grown-up adult? And they said, I want to be an airline pilot, which is great. I want to be a soccer player like Messi, which is great. I want to be a singer like Taylor Swift, which is great. But, never mention a STEM career. Once they go to the lab and they see how science solves real problems, and that science, anybody, many of us can study science, they are amazed. And we ask the same question once they are out of the lab, and they say, oh, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer, right? So we need to bring science close to the people, and that will be very important. Among many bad things that the pandemic has given to us, there is one that probably is positive, that now we are seeing a collaboration between governments, pharmaceutical companies, private companies, universities, NGOs, because all of us have been trying to protect the people and finding the vaccine and protecting during the pandemic. So now there is the communities, the society is seeing that we can work together, and that all of us need to collaborate, as Cecilia was saying, to solve the pandemic, but also to provide jobs and to provide economic development, right? And it's, in addition to improving the economies of the families, inclusion also provides motivation, innovation, better results for our companies. And that's great. So that's what I wanted to share. We need to provide jobs, and we need to share our know-how so societies can learn STEM and many other things and apply them to the economic recovery. Thank you, Michael.
Great. Thank you, Jose. That was terrific. Really 3 excellent presentations, all quite hopeful in their way. I just want to remind the participants could submit questions using the Q&A function in Zoom. The event hashtag is LAC Rebuilding, or on Twitter, or by emailing questions to meetings@thedialogue.org. And we're already starting to get a few questions in. But if I could just ask one question to all of you very quickly. I mean, just listening to the excellent presentations, there is a lot of hope and optimism, and that's conveyed in each of yours and in your areas. And I guess my question is, to the extent that a lot of it is the product of real emergency, which is the pandemic. Is there, how much of what's happening do you see being sustained going forward beyond the pandemic? Is this a permanent way of doing things? These collaborations, all of the things that you've pointed to in your areas. How does one build on some of the momentum that's been created as a result of this response to an emergency to really try to produce more inclusive, more equitable, more collaborative societies as a whole? Has this been a wake-up call that you think there's enough motivation to continue over time? So let me ask each of you if you comment briefly, and then we'll go to the audience. Karim?
Look, Michael, I think you're totally right. I think it's a wake-up call. And what we have to learn is what digitalization have allowed us and where we need to go. Meaning, we have seen the challenges, in the first months, connecting schools, getting the right content. But I think in most of the countries, we have been able to achieve that as a PPP. I think what is important is really to continue the digitalization, to ensure that schools in rural areas are connected, to work on connecting more people. Sometimes we are focusing on the hype, the move of getting the latest technology, the latest top, but we forget that we need to see how we can connect those part of the countries that are not connected, and it needs to be a collaboration between the government and the private sector in our digital sector, but in all the sectors. Okay, I think that's very important. The second part is what can we learn about how the things have been managed. Governments needs to become more digital because it allows everybody to have more access to it. We have seen that access to information can improve, but also have its challenges because of where is the information coming from. So I think we are just starting. We are just starting. I don't think we will be back at, as I said before, in normal in 2021. It will take so much time, and depending on the scenarios that you're hearing from the experts, you can see a world that has been vaccinated, or at least an OECD world in 2021 by the end of the year, at least what we read. But we'll have to see how this is going to take place in our region, in the Latin American region, and how this is going to affect. So I think we really need to start seeing more digitalized society, more access to that information, more connectivity that is going to come. And for that, we need to create that new content that doesn't have to be only the great content that, the big industry is able to create, but it's also education. It's also how you be sure that schools in the rural areas have access to the same kind of content of quality. And I think that's really the key, because when we will get there, we will have recreated a new normal, and we will potentially be ready for another crisis. But even if there will not be a crisis, we will have allowed those kids or that society to be more inclusive. And this is what we should learn, I think, from this crisis.
Great, thank you, very helpful. Cecilia, have any thoughts on that?
Yes, so a couple of thoughts. I do think we need to move from the emergency mode to the sustainable mode. And I think one of the things that when I'm thinking about the region, I do believe that Latin America and the Caribbean region are very resilient regions. So in a way, I do believe that people coming from the region are a lot more resilient than many other places in the world. But I think we need to really think and kind of like take stock of which are some of the concrete things that we can do that we've learned from the pandemic that could help us sustain a more positive development in the region. And just to mention a couple, I think Karim was also referring to the possibility and opportunity to disseminate knowledge. And I think in our region, it's even easier because we somehow share a language, share many similar cultures. So in a way, it's much easier sometimes to just like disseminate knowledge and really have a broader impact on using this knowledge to ramp up training, for example, to really closing the gap, as I was saying before. Is there a way that we can really think about like improving, for example, rural education with many of the vulnerable communities that have never had access to good education? Is there something that we can do with the use of new technologies and really just like closing the gap with this very specific vulnerable groups? But I'm also thinking about other very concrete actions. And if we're thinking about sustainability, is there something about the pandemic that can really teach us to have a more sustainable life from a health perspective? Is there something about the public life that we can promote in our own cities that can be more sustainable? I think that, for example, just thinking about the way that cities are using their public space, the way they're using their streets, the way that we have reduced the motorized mobility is bringing a lot of healthy behaviors into our cities. So is this something that we can sustain beyond the pandemic times? And I think it's a good time to just, again, take stock of some of the good practices that have improved the quality of living of people, and really just kind of make sure that we can use that as a way to promote more sustainability. So these are my initial thoughts on how we can just move from emergency to sustainable living.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you. Jose, you have any thoughts?
Yes, a few comments. And let me start with a reflection. I always talk to my kids or my employees and said, imagine if the COVID, this pandemic, will have arrived in 1990, just 30 years ago. You know, the impact would have been more devastating because the technology was not there. And as Karim was saying, there has been millions and millions of billions of dollars of investments. So now we are a connected society, right? But I think we needed like a external event, and this was probably COVID, that help us to make a step change in the way that we use technology. And I think starting, with the pandemic, but also in the future, we have the chance to be more productive as a society. What I'm saying, right? We don't have to be physically present. Sometimes yes, and that will be great, and we can meet physically, but we can do a lot of things working from home. We have employees in Mexico City, and they spend 3-4 hours per day commuting. Imagine what we'll do for them permanently if we allow them, and we will, to work 3-4 days from home. So as a society, we'll be more productive, less traffic, better life balance for our societies. And very important, and also Karim mentioned this, we are more connected. There were a lot of people excluded from progress, from advances in the society because they live in rural areas or they didn't have access to many things. Now we're more connected, and everybody, regardless where they live, almost everybody, they can have the best content, right? And they have immediate availability of data and information. So we need to learn from this and continue to be collaborate. As I was saying in my introduction remarks, now universities, private companies, governments, NGOs, we were forced to collaborate to help to protect the society and find the vaccine. We will have different challenges in 2020 and the future. Let's keep the collaboration that we learn how to do it.
Great, thank you. Let's go to the first question. If the panelists can offer any suggestions for ways that governments can make it easier to partner with the private sector in helping the vulnerable recover, what's standing in the way of that partnership, if you see any obstacles? Who would like to take that?
Michael, if I can raise an easy one, okay, and it's going to look very selfish, but it's an example. If we want to get more connectivity, we need to look at what is the cost of the connectivity and what is the cost that is fixed, building a network and etc., and what are the costs that are variables. In several countries, there are a lot of taxes on technology because it was considered for a while a very trendy device and etc. So taking down those taxes. Other places, spectrum. Spectrum is the wave that we use to connect people. In some countries, spectrum is incredibly expensive, and Latin America has a tradition, unfortunately, a negative tradition of having spectrum costs that are higher than other places. So reducing the cost of spectrum, because obviously if an operator is able to pay less in spectrum, you will be able to dedicate more money to cover. And then, as I said, working more or using more the resources in order to cover those places that are uncovered. Sometimes it's very difficult to cover rural areas because there is no economic sense to cover them because there are not enough people living there. So developing some projects that are PPPs, like some countries like Sweden, but also other countries have demonstrated in order to cover those rural areas. I think those are very easy steps. They have an impact sometimes on the financial side because less taxes mean less revenue, but you have other ways to gain that because the long-term effect is very positive because you're connecting those areas and you're allowing new revenue, new opportunities to be created there. And I think these crises show us that you have new business model that can start. People have started companies from their houses using technology. So why don't focusing on that as a long-term investment and as a country focused not only on the cities, but also the rural areas. And it will potentially on the long term solve some of the problems Jose was talking about Mexico. I love Mexico City, it's one of my preferred cities in the continent. But when he was talking about the 3 hours a day of traffic, I think if each of us that have been living there or traveled there, remember how tough it is. If you are able to convince the people to stay more in their area, in their cities, instead of moving to the main capitals, because you allow them to develop new business model there, this is going to be another opportunity. It will have impact on the sustainability because you will have less traffic. So there are a lot of things that digitalization can bring us to. And a lot sometimes can be solved by working on the fiscal and not seeing that sector as a way to get more money, but as a sector to embed and to create more opportunities.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to that, there's a question about, the fiscal issue is clearly a major challenge, I think, in almost every country. And we have somebody who asked if do you think that there is a risk of return of inflation. We all remember, or at least I remember, all of you are younger than me, but I remember the days of, hyperinflation, which was the worst thing ever. I lived in Peru in the late 1980s, and it was terrible. We see Venezuela today. Is there risks of the kind of spending without getting enough on the revenue side that you can have, that it could produce inflation? Does that concern you?
Look, I think it concerns everybody, but I think at the same time, I trust several of the governments to be able to develop some sound policy, and the OECD, the IBD, CEPAL has been pretty clear on trying to help with recommendation. I think our sector is more private investment led, so I think you will see less potential spending there, and I think you have a lot of competition in most of those markets, so mostly difficult that you're going to see inflation coming from there. But I think we should be careful with it. As an Italian, I thank you for the younger. Unfortunately, I also lived those crazy moments of Italy where our currency was going up and down like crazy. I think we have to be careful. And I think this is where the ministers of finance, but also all of us, should work together. Because if we are able to develop sound policy to attract the capital, you're not going to need to put so much money. I think most of the time is really unleash the potential. And I'm a huge believer, people know me as a free market advocate and etc. I'm really a believer that this crisis should teach us that some sectors will need investments. I said education, health. We identified some of the problems, but there are also other sectors that have been proven that with private investment that can be used on the public side, like we have done in the crisis, can be sometimes a solution. And I think even in the US, there have been pretty good examples there of what companies have been able to do. So I think we should really focus on that. We almost need to do a new pact to work together between companies, local companies, international companies, government, and international organization, to work on models that allow us to keep the economy growing in a sustainable way and not artificially. Artificially, unfortunately, will bring us where you were talking about, Michael.
Right. Okay, great. I have a question for Jose, and then I have a question for Cecilia that's directed to, first one's directed to Jose, which is how 3M is working with foundations and non-governmental organizations on this pandemic. Do you think 3M will increase its strategic collaboration and produce less inequality in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Yes. First of all, we work very closely with many NGOs, being United Way our number one, and basically because United Way is a foundation of foundations, right? And then we can help many other foundations through United Way. But specifically, we don't want just to give a check or ask our employees to give some money and then send it to the NGOs. For us, it's very important, number one, the volunteer hours, right? That our employees are really committed to share their knowledge that they gain at the university, and especially working for 3M with the NGOs. We have many NGOs that we help in our offices, and also we have people from around the world, 3Mers, come into our countries and help local NGOs with experiences with other countries, right? But more important is how can we transmit the know-how to the societies. That's why we're very, focused in the science. We're very focused in the STEMs, and we understand that after the pandemic, we need to double down on that efforts and working more with the foundations. And I think also not just with the foundations, also with the governments and the universities, right? Karim was mentioning, if we leave all the solutions to the governments, that would be a big risk of inflation, or even worse, if the governments believe that they can solve everything, that would be a big problem. Has to be everybody, NGOs, private companies, governments, universities, collaborating. And I think that the best way is each individual company to help, but also through the trade associations that in many of our countries are very powerful. So yes, we will be collaborating more, but not just with money or in-kind donations, with knowledge and promoting science in our communities.
Great, thank you. Cecilia, there's a question or a comment really from Daniel Suarez, and a couple of the questions are along the similar lines about the importance of inclusion that you've talked about, but that the problem is that the opportunities don't exist, and you can't have inclusion without opportunities. And how can you really generate more opportunities to better access and to education, better knowledge in science and the like? Is there a way to ensure that you expand opportunities and then you can carry out policies of inclusion?
So definitely, yes, I do believe that we need to agree on a social pact that allow us to understand which are the social priorities in each different context. But I believe in the power of agreeing on a minimum of a social protection system. And if every country is able to do that, and as a region, we can really agree on the importance of having a social protection system. And when I'm saying this, is basically agreeing on ensuring, as we can see through the pandemic, if we're not able to ensure a good health system, if we're not able to ensure a good educational system, then it's very difficult to think about any other kind of opportunities, right? We're not going to be able to have good employees if we're not able to solve the stunting of our children. So we got to make sure that we're protecting the minimum basis of a good social protection system in every different country. But the other thing I wanted to say, just building upon the first question that was more related to, are there any possibilities of governments helping the recovery? I do think governments have a very strategic role on also creating a balance between investing in very small and medium enterprises and probably also supporting the corporate sector that is also in charge of a large scale recovery of the economies. But I do believe there's a specific momentum, for example, for social innovation. So basically having governments really invest in a different kind of operational model that allows to invest probably small resources, but reactivating other parts of the economy that can really bring some innovation into the systems. And I think it's a good momentum for that, to really kind of invest and believe in social innovators and bring, for example, together, how can I use social innovation in order to improve public services, for example? Or is there a way that by investing or lowering loans interest or something like that, that you can really promote small businesses? So I think there's a big responsibility from governments to do that and really promote social equity.
Great, thank you. We're getting a lot of great questions. Unfortunately, the time is limited, but I would like to ask just one final question, and if any of you or three of you have any comments would be great, because there are a few questions that really go to this, is the issue of labor informality. They estimate that in Peru, 70% of the, of the labor market is informal. Are there ideas? Is this an opportunity? Is there anything the private sector can do to help move towards greater formalization? Somebody else asks about, how do you get to migrants and refugees and others that are just, that are clearly, working in the shadows, and people without legal status. Are there any best practices or any things that you've seen being done that you think are very, would be relevant to this? Who would like to take that?
Maybe on refugees and good practices, I want to give the example of Boa Vista is a city in the borders between Brazil and Venezuela. And there, one of the amazing things that the mayor was able to do was basically integrate all the migrants into the social system of the city and really just consider migrants as like normal citizens. So I think that's a good practice and a good example of how you can really use the opportunity of migration to just actually also kind of integrate people into the system with all the challenges that also brings, because we already have challenges with our own populations. But as a region, I do think that we need to find creative ways to make migrants be able to have like a regular access to different opportunities. I think this is a very important thing to work in.
Quick comment from me. I think informality is a big issue in Latin America. And even though it will take many years to solve, we can start very fast. And the answer is technology, right? Now with technology, everybody can transfer money, everybody can create a credit record, everybody can get access to credit and know-how, credit at very low interest rates and very good know-how on how to start and manage a business. So let's keep focusing in technology, and that's the big bet, collaboration between private companies and governments to solve these issues together.
Wonderful.
And I think just to complement what Jose said, every person, or we are getting there, have a device. And I think what we call MFS, or mobile financial services, are a way to get back people out of informality to formality. And if governments want to develop models where they distribute government funds or they work around that with private sector, we have a great example in Paraguay that has been working with Tigo Money, our brand in Paraguay, in order to reach vulnerable communities with government funds during the pandemic. That can be an example. It doesn't have to be us. There are plenty of people doing that everywhere, okay? So that's a way how digitalization can help us, because most of the time people will not have the time to create an account, they will not have the knowledge. And there are great examples, not only in Latin America, but also in Africa, of project that has been done around that we should look at, because I think it's a very interesting way, especially considering if that, coverage is increasing, more and more people have access to 3G or 4G technologies, and that's really something that we should use. We have to remember one thing: digitalization will come. The more government digitalize and we get to 100% digitalization of the government, the more the users are going to be digitalized, because they know that instead of losing hours in queuing to get a document, they will be able to access it. I know I'm going to say something that is going to be look at the moon, but if you look at the example of Estonia and what they've been able to do in the past 25 years, it's incredible the results that they've been able to achieve in digitalization and usage. I get it, Estonia is Europe and whatever, we cannot compare it to Latin America, but I'm sure we can, because if we work on digitalization, the result will be impressive and super fast.
Great. Well, that's a wonderful note, hopeful note to end on. I want to thank Karim, Cecilia, and Jose. I'm really sorry that our time has run out. I really appreciate your time and your very thoughtful perspectives and sharing us with our participants. I want to thank all of our participants this morning. Also, your great questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them, but they're all very, very stimulating and very important, which means that we should probably have a follow-up session, because there's obviously a lot of interest out there. I want to give a special thanks to the United Way and to Jose Farao for his collaboration and partnership in this event, and also to recognize and thank again Eric Brand, who does such a fantastic job with our corporate program, and Kate Blassett for coordinating this event. I like this event a lot because there is a lot of hope, and in the midst of real uncertainty about what the future might bring. But I think all of you have really identified some very sort of promising ways to move forward for Latin American society as a whole. So I really appreciate that. And I just hope that all of you enjoy your holidays and get some rest and stay well and stay healthy. That's the main thing. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but we're still in the tunnel. So we have to take good care and continue with all the precautions. So thank you all very, very much, and healthy and happy holidays to everybody.